was like, I have a problem.
Yeah. So what did you identify? Because I'm guessing that people didn't look the same, but they have similar traits and personalities.
It was the same traits, same personalities, and then the same scenario. So it was like it would always end the same way. Mm-hmm. And had I not journaled, and then one day, this is what really kind of changed my life in a sense. One day I was just reading back through my journal, and I'm like,
I have a pattern.
This is disgusting. Yeah. And at that time, I didn't know anything about self-compassion and giving myself grace. So I just really was disgusted with myself that I continuously allowed myself to grow through this. But it was life-changing because then I got to see, all right, I have a problem, and here are the themes. If I had not journaled, I would have never seen that. So I'm very grateful for that moment.
So this was you looking at your past self, or this was as you were writing it, you were realizing?
So it was a moment where I'm having a traumatic issue in a romantic situation. Yeah. And I'm reflecting back on this other time that I was hurt. And then I'm like, well, wait a second, let me go back to this and go back to that. And it just kind of was like, started with my present self, then I started looking at my past self. Yeah.
So for me, I think a lot of people will either discover that with either a therapist or with a person that really holds them accountable, like a friend that you had. Well, kind of like your friend earlier, where you did reference to, like, who could trust you with their most vulnerable thoughts without the fear of judgment.
Right.
But at the same time, how many of us have those type of people in our life that can actually throw it out on the table and we don't necessarily get defensive? And most people get defensive and attack the person that's telling us about ourselves.
And I will say that my friends are good. If anything, I'm the defensive motherfucker.
That's your cancer side.
No, for real. Because I was about to say, none of my friends do that because I'm the defensive one. But we trust each other. And even last night when she was telling me, I was like, I understand the lack of impulse control, how you can get emotional. I was like, but sis, you're making the situation worse.
Yeah.
Like, you're going to therapy, great, but you got to do the works. And it was another one of our friends there too. So it was like, be comfortable to share, but know that we're going to be honest with you. We're not going to say that that's appropriate, but we're going to do it with love.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. And people have to learn empathy, vulnerability, and all of that in order to communicate with people in a way where they don't get defensive.
It's hard because a lot of times I think a lot of situations like that come to the table and people will weaponize it against you. And that's where, I don't know, I guess I'm the biggest advocate of therapy because you don't have a person that's going to necessarily use it against you to keep you, to maintain their stake in your life. Whereas our friends or maybe our lovers, they don't want to lose us or they don't want to lose a certain level of access to us. So they only feel comfortable being so honest in certain regards.
Kevin Hart's learning that firsthand right now with that extortion.
Facts.
Yeah.
I experienced that in romantic situations for sure. But as of late, as I grow and become better, I always try to create a safe space.
Yeah.
So, no lie, I was talking to a gentleman and he expressed that he was watching trans porn.
Kevin Hart.
And in that moment, my brain was like, ah! But I was like, oh, let me ask more questions because it was the trans person's dick out, because if they were just giving head and they look like a woman, maybe we can work with that. So let me
hold on 1 second. Have you ever watched a porn and you was like looking at a person like a blowjob video, right? And you're like, that look like a man. Have you ever seen that?
Where I'm watching it and I'm like, that looks like a man?
Yeah.
Not that I can think of.
I've seen it. I
asked some of my male friends.
Okay.
And one of them was like, hell no, but that does not mean he's gay. That is what he told me. Another one said that sometimes you'll come across it. It's not on purpose. And then you'll realize, something's not all the way correct about this.
That's where I was going.
There's something about that woman's dick that's really... there's something going on with this woman's dick. No,
the way it happened is because they'll put trans porn on straight pages.
Right.
And you don't notice it because, like, if I don't know how to speak for women, but I know speak for men, we're like, the hornier we get, the dumber we get. And
right,
yeah.
so you could definitely be like, wait a minute, I don't see any breasts. No,
right. Yeah. So in that moment, instead of spazzing out, my thought process was, in order to get honesty from somebody, you have to create a safe space. Okay. And me creating that safe space is not overreacting. Yeah. So let me be open and ask questions. And then I also had to think
What's your
about.
follow-up question?
I asked him, well, like, what was the scene? And the scene was oral sex.
Okay.
So it was the trans woman giving head to the guy.
Did he search it?
Now, I don't know if he searched it. Okay. I didn't ask that. But I watched
important.
I watched lesbian porn, though. So then I had to ask myself, and I'm not
double
gay.
Standard. There's a double
I've
standard.
I've never been with a woman. I'm not attracted to women. There is a certain element of lesbian porn that interests me. And I'm not gay, so it is a double standard. It gets tricky.
Yeah. Could you date a man that used to be gay?
No.
Okay. Could you date a woman that used to be gay?
I thought you were going to ask me if I could date a man that used to be gay. I was like, used to be. Maybe. If he used to be, maybe. If he found the Lord, maybe. Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with that.
Okay.
I mean, I don't really care. I think really just do what I like. And even like if like, you know, they're into like trans shit, I'm like, all right, cool. Like, I don't care what other people are into. Just, you know, do what you want. Use as many holes as you want. I don't care.
I also said that I would never date a short man, so.
That's true.
You know, as you age, you're like, he got 4 teeth, I'll take him.
You said,
this dude is so 6'7". He's homeless.
Right, but.
No, it's funny you say that because there's a crazy stat that, like, there aren't a lot of tall homeless men.
That's interesting.
Think about it. Like when you watch and you see the people asking, "Hey, you can get some change?" They're always
can I have some change up there?
they're never tall. I've probably seen my one too.
Homeless people are also very unattractive a lot of times, and so I do wonder.
Let's kick them while we're down. Why don't we? Yeah, homeless people, their breath. What else do we not like about them?
Yeah.
Let's see.
I'm talking about just like
their grammar. Their grammar's not great.
Yeah.
Show me a homeless person that knows how to use a semicolon. Okay, let's talk about the real issues.
Right. I do wonder if
women. I'll go ahead.
I do wonder because you have a certain unearned privilege when you're tall, when you're attractive. Short hair versus long hair, big versus skinny. Mm-hmm. And so I do wonder if though sometimes homeless people have got the brunt of not having privilege in all ways, whether it's economically, financially, physically, looks, intelligence, if that makes you more likely to be in those type of situations. I do wonder that. I'm not saying that it's right or wrong.
And it goes back to mental illness as well, because a lot of them are like, a good amount of them are veterans that have like PTSD.
Because mental stability is an unearned privilege, I feel like, in itself.
But it's very fickle.
It is fickle.
Because one traumatic issue could push you right on the other side of like, now I have a problem.
And most of that stuff that pushes you, now I have a problem, is probably associated with some shit that you didn't have a privilege for. Which is what impacted your mental health in the first place.
Yeah, and they actually, there's this historian who I love named Rutger Bregman, and he had this TED Talk he did where he said, poverty isn't a lack of character, it's a lack of cash. And he brings up this study that was done where they took farmers at the beginning of the harvest and at the end of the harvest, and they gave them IQ tests. And they found that, I might be mixing it up a little bit, but like at the beginning of the harvest when they didn't really have like much, like they didn't really have anything on hand, like they found that the IQ when they had more like supply was like much higher.
Really?
When, like when your means are essentially and we found that with the COVID relief checks that came out last year was like
for sure
people had a moment to breathe and they weren't like worrying about like the amount of people that have some form of mental illness that like would the mental illness problem in this country would be solved in a lot of ways if there was more stuff like that. And you can see that especially in the rise in suicides in recent years, a lot of people will attribute that to like teenagers and like emo kids and killing themselves. But where the sharpest rise was in middle-aged men who were having their jobs either shift overseas or automated.
The feeling of inadequacy.
They didn't have really any, financial support. Maybe some of them had disability, but they also, working in manufacturing all your life, you're going to have shoulder problems and all this shit. Your doctor's going to prescribe you opioids.
Which is why I said it's a privilege, because I have a full-time job. I can afford therapy. I go to therapy, once a month. It's a lot of people that can't afford that.
Absolutely.
If they're drug addicts, they can't afford to stop working or even to go off to a facility to get back straight. Like, mental health really is a privilege. And it's crazy to say, because it should be a right for everybody. But if you got some issues in adulthood, it's hard to get help if you don't have the means. Even... like, I have psoriasis, and so I'm going through this whole rigmarole, which I do every 3 months, of getting my medicine. I have to call the insurance and call the pharmacy and call my doctor. And I was so angry on Monday, and I asked the representative, what do people do when they can't mentally do this? This is a lot. Just for somebody who is right now sane. If I'm depressed, if I'm feeling inadequate, how am I supposed to call therapists and get help? And therapists don't call you back, and you already feel like you're ready to give up.
My first bout with a therapist it was even with happens with homelessness out in Cali. I have a friend out there, and she says people either remain in their despair or they learn to manipulate the system. So, case in point with therapists. When I needed a therapist, I was going through a real tough time, and it kind of like reoccurs around this time for Thanksgiving and New Year's. I talked to the therapist, and she said she was all booked up. And then she said, well, legally I have to ask you, are you thinking about hurting yourself or someone else? And I actually took a pause, was like, I should lie just so I can get what I need right now. But that's what most people end up doing. I said no.
And the other issue is, if you do say yes, they admit you.
Right.
Now, and it could even be, and I've seen that first, and I haven't been admitted, but I've seen it firsthand where somebody that's close to me said, sometimes I don't feel like being here. And they admitted them.
Yeah. Well, it depends on where they are, because people that will try to get off the street will say the same thing when they're manipulating the system. But now with what my friend was saying out there, they would say something like that, and then I guess they got hip to the game. So what they'll say is, okay, if you don't have a plan, you're not really thinking about it. You're just trying to get off the street for the day.
They do say that. Okay, so, see, I'm thinking of it from regards of a person not homeless, but a person who is homeless to say something like that. That's interesting to me, because it's for a totally different purpose.
Yeah.
Well, you have like similar situations where it's like a homeless person will just commit some form of like petty
crime to get off the street.
Yeah, just to have like a place in,
couple good meals. I know people that go to jail to get dental work. It's been
I got a friend who went to jail just for the sex.
Yeah.
He wasn't.
That's a guy that's thinking.
Yeah.
He doesn't need Tinder, Grindr, or whatever other things. He doesn't need the swipe.
Yeah. He's just like, fuck all
whatever's
this.
in a box. I mean,
I don't need a wife when I can become a wife.
Right.
Like, let's make that happen.
Absolutely.
That's funny.
Absolutely.
So my dad had been missing for 10 years, and early October, late September, his sister calls me and say, hey, we found your dad. So he had been living as homeless, and when they found him, he was in a hospice with 2 months to live, which that's a whole nother story in itself. And
we've been talking about the wrong shit. This is interesting.
He ended up passing away. But it was interesting to me because his friends that he lived with on the street did like a memorial for him. And I had not seen him I had not spoken to him in almost 10 years. And the way they spoke about him was so amazing to me, because their values as homeless people is totally different. Like, we value materialistic things and the type of car somebody drives or how much money they make or their success. But when they were talking about my dad, he was creative. He would give his food as long as he had a can of food, or he would stand up for women, or you know, he was, I don't know, it was just all of those. It just blew my mind that, because when I talked to my therapist about it, that first week when I found out he had been living homeless, I was so emotional because I was like, it had to be so lonely out there on the street.
But he had more of a community than most people that have that privilege. He had
love, bruh.
Yeah.
That was mind blowing.
That's true. I haven't thought of that before.
And in the deepest, most genuine way, because they had nothing to offer each other but
community,
character, and community, and it was
doesn't
mind blowing.
that gives you hope for humanity too, doesn't it?
It does,
because we have this like veneer theory where it's like, oh, if we lose everything, like everyone, like Lord of the Flies. There's this idea that it, you know, like, oh, if we were to take away rule, you know, you take people and you put them on an island without any sort of like rules or anything, they're just gonna, you know, it's gonna be chaos. Well, actually, back to that guy Rutger Bregman I mentioned earlier. He wrote a book called Humankind: A Hopeful History, which I recommend anyone who has any sort of like I think anyone that has like a negative view of human nature, which I think a lot of us do because of how you know, society, like, you know, society like kind of makes us like look for the worst in each other. And the whole book is basically deconstructing that, and he brings up Lord of the Flies and a story that actually is now, since he wrote the book, this story is going to be made into a movie, where it was a group of, I think, like 3 or 4 boys who were like shipwrecked on an island, and it didn't become Lord of the Flies chaos. They basically lived in relative harmony. Like, they like survived for like, I think it was like a year or so out there, and like, you know, I mean, there were arguments and shit, but like overall they cooperated and worked together. And that's like the kind of thing that, like, yeah, they're not gonna teach you, you know, to trust each other. They're gonna, you know, they want us to be divided.
I think separate groups will they'll develop different cultures, and it may be a factor of where we came from and how we were raised within our families and stuff like that. So somebody might say, "Hey, I might have to assert myself as a leader," and then it's become a sense of control. And then other things were like, "I can't trust anybody. All you guys are basically my enemies because I need to hoard everything for myself." And then you end up by yourself, isolated, or like most people in privilege. Whereas if you have nothing and you have socks, you have a shirt, and I have pants, where it's like, okay, we put all these things together, one person can go into the store and get everything for everybody. There
was a homeless girl who had a car, and she went around the neighborhood. She came back 3 times, and she could fit 4 people at a time in her car, going to get people to come to the memorial at this picnic table.
That's crazy.
It was crazy. I never felt more loved by God than in that moment.
Wow.
It was mind blowing. For real.
Do you have any idea what drove him to living on the street? Yeah,
so and y'all know I have a crude sense of humor, so I do have some jokes about this, but I'm not ready to tell them yet.
Okay.
But he was an Army vet. So he was a veteran. He had drug abuse issues. Okay. I'm pretty sure he had some mental health issues. I just know what I go through with my anxiety. I haven't chose crack yet, but I know what I go through. So I can only imagine, you know, the mental.
Well, just even with him, you saying he's a former veteran and then he got on drugs. I mean, well, a lot of people end up on drugs because they don't have another coping mechanism and because they're trying to distance themselves.
Exactly.
And then another problem develops, and now you become engulfed by the addiction and then the problem you were trying to run from.
And the biggest issue was I didn't want to be a burden. So me and him got a chance to talk on his deathbed, basically.
That sucks.
And so, yeah. The thing that he said was, I didn't come around because I did not want to be a burden, and I just wanted to have some good news. That was his thing.
Yeah.
But it gave me peace to know that despite, you know, him not being a great father because of his own issues, and I forgive him because I'm an adult now and we all go through shit and I understand it. I'm so happy that he was good to people. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like he wasn't cutthroat. He had good character, despite...
You felt he was cutthroat until you saw that memorial.
I didn't think he was cutthroat, but I would have never thought that they would come and say that kind of stuff, because I already thought it was this isolated, I'm sleeping on the sidewalk by myself and I don't have anybody.
Yeah.
That was what was in my brain. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like being homeless actually isn't that bad.
Hey,
I saw homeless couples.
I thought the same thing.
Yo, no, for real. No, for real. Like, we laughing about it, but at the same time, I got two situations where I really question, like, what am I really working for?
Bruh.
Because I saw a couple, they were sleeping and having sex on cardboard, and I'm like, here I am, can't get a swipe right.
Bruh.
Or I don't like what's swiping right on me.
And I had to process that situation very quickly because it was a short span of not talking to him and then finding that out. And I will never forget the week before I went to go see him, it was WizKid was coming to town. You know who WizKid is? He's an African singer. And I was going to the concert and my mom calls me and she was like, you know, your dad's not doing good. I don't think he's going to make it.
Okay.
By the time we get there. And so for about 5 minutes, I got super emotional and I was crying. Then I took a deep breath and I'm like, I'm going to follow my dad's footsteps and continue to live my life and worry about this later.
Yeah.
So,
compartmentalized.
Yeah.
I already paid for my tickets.
I have never used that word so much until the last 3 months because that's exactly what I had to do. But I feel like it could not have happened in a better time in my life because I would not have been able to have the tools to do that even a year ago. Like it happened right when it should.
Right on time.
Because I did not fall into a depression. I did not spiral. I had.
Do you think a lot of the times you will fall into that spiral, that depression, because you didn't have the means to cope, but you had a problem that you knew you had to deal with?
Yes, I did not. Immediately when it happened, I had a therapist I could call. I talked to my therapist before I even called my dad, so I was able to process and get. I knew to pause, to not be reactive, to not say, okay, just because she's calling me, I haven't talked to him in 10 years. I don't have to call him today. Like, that's what I told myself. I don't have to call him today. So I was able to take that time to really process and reflect and really get my feelings and not not avoid. Yeah. I felt every feeling. I did not distract myself by going out or drinking or smoking weed. Like, I felt every emotion. And I would not have been able to do that before. Yeah.
That's
so,
good.
Yeah.
What was the other situation with the homeless? Oh, I saw a guy at a Waffle House, and I told a joking story about this, but he was living out his truck, and he had this weird contraption in which he was taking a shower out the back of his truck, and I was like, that is low key genius, but at the same time, he's talking to himself as like he's talking to the soap in his hair, and when it's all said and done, he's taking a shower in the Waffle House parking lot. It's like, that's crazy within itself, but at the same time, it's low
innovative.
Key, right? It's low key genius, and at the same time, it's like when you think about all the bills a person has to deal with, like, you know, bills, rent, mortgage, all the insurances and stuff like that. He has car insurance if his car's paid off and all that stuff like that. Like, he's living his best life and he can pick up and go whenever he wants to. Yeah. That's like people, the tiny house people, container home people, or people that live in RVs and just like pick up and go. Like, we have this set, like, these benchmarks that we have in society of like, you're not living unless you're doing X, Y, Z. And that's where I think where we all got into the point of like, oh, we're looking at the homeless people in their situations differently because we've lived in this bubble for so long.
It's definitely a bubble. It's definitely a bubble.
And yeah, it makes you think about like that, specifically the idea of like, I gotta have this car, I gotta have this house, I gotta, you know,
it makes you think about what you value.
Yeah. But also, if you were the only person on the planet, would you still be like, I gotta have this mansion, I gotta have this nice car, or would you go for comfort over like style? You know, like, would you just be like, you know what, I just like, I don't care what other people's opinion is, I just want a tiny home. You know, like, I just want, you know, my own thing. Like it's interesting how when you look at I mean, like, these stories that we tell ourselves, essentially, you know, like, about, like, oh, I gotta do this because why do you have to do that? Oh, because I gotta do it. Like, you can't, like, there's no real reason driving it. It's just because we tell ourselves that, like, we gotta reach, like, a certain goal, you know?
Yeah. Go ahead.
I recently had a huge debate on Facebook about people making a certain income. And so they basically were like, oh, you can't live on $100K in this society. And I'm like, what are y'all doing?
It
Bruh,
goes back to what you're trying to do.
I swear to you, I'm just as happy now with my income as when I was making $20K. Now, I couldn't do what I do now, that I was like traveling and doing all of that, but I was happy. I just adjusted. I had a roommate. I still spent time with friends. I've always done what it is that I love to do. And so I just couldn't relate. So somebody commented and said, well, you had a roommate and you couldn't travel. That doesn't sound like happiness to me. And I'm just like, y'all, that's what...
You just shifted your happiness.
Yeah.
It's always into...
Well, do you think happy people always find a way to be happy?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I do. I think that you always find a silver lining, or you always hold on to hope. I was watching this YouTube video with this guy he was homeless and he got shot in the face. So like half of his face was like gone. And the way he just talked about what happiness was to him was astonishing to me, because here this man is, half his face is gone and he's homeless, but he's still finding a way, despite his circumstances, to be grateful for life. And that's really interesting to me, because sometimes, not to be morbid, but you look at a situation like that and like, bro, if that was me, I'm out of here. Like, that's just not worth living. But what is the meaning to life for those type of people who have nothing? Like, that's just so intriguing to me. And I think that we can learn from those people in our everyday bustle of life. I think we can learn a very valuable message of what it means to really live and find happiness.
Well, for me, I had that experience firsthand with my brother. My brother is disabled, mentally disabled, and he basically has the body of an old man inside the body of a preteen, right? Now his body is breaking down more and more. But with him, I noticed that he always had a natural he naturally gravitate towards children and older people, because those are the people that he can be the most of assistance to. And at the end of the day, he just wanted to be helpful. And I think at the root of most people, we take away materialism. That's what most of us just want to be. We just want to be of use in some form of fashion. And like, even going back to your father, like, I want to have good news. I didn't want to be a burden. And going back to what you said about the spike in suicide, when men, I'm speaking to men because I am one, but our worth is based on how useful we are. And we deem ourselves inadequate as a provider, as a father, or as a community member. We question our ability or our usefulness to be here. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about some of those gender roles with my male friends, because even with my ex-husband.
How long were you married again?
We were together 7.5, but married for 3.5 of those years.
Quick question. What changed between your dating and marriage life?
What changed?
Yeah.
A
Besides
lot.
The title.
What changed for me personally?
I guess your for you personally, and then your perception of him.
Oh, he's like one of my best friends.
You said that, you said as best friends.
Yeah, my perception, okay, now I can answer the question. My perception of him changed because I realized I have trauma. I have stuff that I have to work through, and so do other people. It's not always personal.
I don't mean like the relationship going down. I mean like how you identified or how you looked at him, or how maybe you behaved as a girlfriend versus becoming a wife.
How I behaved as a girlfriend versus becoming a wife.
Yes.
I mean, that's hard for me to answer. Are you talking about like my role? The things that I did?
How did you internalize it? Did you say my role changed, or did you say, okay, I can look at things in a different way because I'm now a wife, because that's more of a long-term agreement versus this can be, well, obviously we know a marriage can dissolve just as fast as a dating situation, but there's something that's supposed to be a little bit more concrete in a construct of a marriage.
It's hard for me to answer that because I'm not the same person, and I definitely did not understand what being a wife was and what it would take and to have a marriage. So I did not understand that at all. Now at 34, I definitely understand it, and I was not ready for that shit by any means back then. Not even a little bit.
What were you lacking?
A mental stability. No, for real though. But I back then I didn't know it. Then codependent, anxious attachment issues, issues with my parents that I had no idea were issues. It was a lot of shit where I look back now, healthy self, and I look back then and I'm like, I was crazy as hell. He didn't help the situation, but I definitely was crazy. How did it
manifest itself in a relationship?
Passive aggressiveness.
Okay.
Emotional manipulation.
This one time you wore your bra and your panties and they didn't match. That was a real deal, bro.
Yeah, I'm like, and I kept it hairy, so that means the shop is closed, brother. You, definitely reactivity, not being understanding, not communicating in an effective way, but it was never malicious. It was always, I needed something and I did not know how to ask for it. So I acted out.
And you didn't necessarily know what you needed either.
No, couldn't even. I had no idea that in certain situations I needed reassurance.
Oh, okay.
I needed to know that you weren't going to leave. I needed to know that you chose me. Now I can vocalize that in my dating situations if I need to. Yeah. But no, that wasn't even a fucking... Reassurance was not even a word in my vocabulary back then.
Okay.
All I knew was you're not doing what I need you to do, and I don't even know how to say what I need you to do, but you need to figure out what I need you to do.
The hand movements in the shoulder made my blood pressure go up, and I just
right. It's triggering, right?
Yeah, PTSD.
All right, let's shift to you. What was your longest relationship, and what was his name?
Her name.
Look, when you said that, I was like,
right.
I was like, oh, you're gay. Right. I thought that was a joke.
Well, it's about time I
came out the closet.
Yeah. Well, longest, or I don't have that much experience with relationships, really.
Good for you.
Well, not really good for me because
it's good and bad. I would say
well, good and bad, but
you have positive ones in that.
Yeah, but like the thing is, a lot of times, with like people, the things that we are most insecure about, or the things that we're most worried about, tend to be things that we didn't have in the past.
Right. Yes.
Like if you like had a bad relationship with your parents when you were a kid, you like focused on that as an adult. Yeah. And so I didn't get any attention from the opposite sex when I was like a kid and a teenager. So now that
it impacts.
It really I think back on like my life and even like to the very recent basically the present, a lot of how I kind of define my state of like where I am in my life is like determined by whether or not I'm in a relationship, whether or not I'm this or that.
I can relate.
Yeah, and so I mean I'm like working on that, but like it's.
You like the idea of a relationship or no?
I love the idea of a relationship. I think love is the most beautiful thing there is in the world, and
if people really understood the meaning of it, and truly accepted it. Like I love my ex-husband more now as friends than I could ever love him as a wife, and he has a girlfriend, and I'm happy for them. Yeah, like genuinely happy. I'm so glad he found a woman that loves and appreciates him, that they can have a healthy relationship. It's no way I could have said that 7 years ago when we first broke up.
Yeah, you told me that.
Yeah,
I mean, but honestly, you need that distance between a person to make peace with yourself, and then also what you tried to build with them and also failed, and then you have if it was a really healthy foundation, I guess, to begin with, you can circle back to the friendship.
It was.
And then,
your personal breakthrough led for you to create a new foundation for the friendship, right?
I feel like in the last 2 years of our marriage, it was a lack of intimacy, but we still went out on dates. So it wasn't like we hated each other. So I think in that time frame, we were building a friendship because we were living together. We were playing video games. It wasn't beef. We just wasn't like romantically involved. And then,
that's when you stopped shaving?
Probably. So I think that it was unique in that way because a lot of times couples break up and it's very volatile, but they're still, being intimate. They're still having sex. It's still like that. It was almost like
that always goes well.
Gradually died out.
Breakup sex?
Yeah, that all breakup sex is always a good idea.
Have you guys had a lot of breakup
never
sex?
backfires? Huh?
Yeah.
How would you rate it on as far as? Okay, well, I guess we get to have different types of sex now. There's the passionate sex, the honeymoon phase sex, and then there's the breakup sex, and it's like everything.
Let's talk about the mundane sex. The sex
that's
where
what I said,
you've been with
everything in
a
between.
motherfucker for a while.
Right. Where you get from like, oh, I like this new thing, and
Where
then
you
it's right before it's
scheduling the
over.
sex. I don't know if
Oh,
you've been there.
Where it's on there for
No, but that's the thing. That is a thing.
Well, I had an ex that did that. She tried to do that, and I was like, no.
I have a friend who's a comic in North Carolina. I don't even know if he does comedy anymore, but he had this joke about like when like him and his wife got married. The biggest thing that changed was like now when we have sex, it's a conversation. We have to have. Like he would say like he was like, yeah, one day we were like watching TV and she just turns to me and was like, do you want me to suck your dick? And I was like, that's a stupid question.
Right, of course.
Of course. Could be at my granddaddy's funeral. Like, this one's for you, granddad.
I actually
shout out Brian Deans.
That's
my boy.
What about the mundane sex or sex schedule for you? If you schedule it,
the kind of sex where you do that before the sex, like
no fact.
All right.
Is that before, during, and after?
I pray in my next relationship it never gets to that point.
Okay, so have you identified like what possibly led to the scheduling of the sex?
So we didn't necessarily schedule sex because we don't have kids, so it wasn't that.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I've heard other women talk about it.
Yeah,
it's
and
like written up on the refrigerator.
No, for real, like alarm in the phone. Today is sex. I mean, for some people, I'm assuming.
You don't want to have an alarm. Like, that'll become Pavlovian if you have an alarm go off and that's a bad experiment.
No, I could
actually, if I ever get married, I'm gonna do that so that then, like, I'll just have like, all right, I'm gonna have every time "Hooked on a Feeling" by Blue Swede plays, we're gonna have sex, and then eventually, I'm just gonna be playing it on the radio, and she's gonna want to have sex. I'm gonna have to write that down. That's a very good idea.
I like the way you think.
That's great.
See,
But that won't work if the sex is good,
I love tricking people into sex. That's a really great idea to have, especially for a successful man.
Well, at least you're doing it with music and not Percocets.
Oh, yeah.
So, there we go.
Yeah. I would like to say on a serious note, I'm not into that. I don't...
So, with the scheduling part right there, it's not like I would probably schedule it with a partner. I think I would remind myself because of the scheduling, because most of my dating history has been women with children. Mm-hmm. And when you get into I don't know, man, if you've ever been around kids would drain you of all your energy.
Bruh. I recently made up my mind, I'm straight on kids.
Really?
Yeah.
What was the deciding factor?
When I'm sitting in my 3-bedroom house and it's peaceful and quiet and I can meditate, I can smoke, I can watch what I want, it's just so peaceful, and I know kids are gonna ruin that, and I just don't want to give that up.
It's funny you say that because I said something similar, and then I remember thinking, well, I guess what you and I would perceive as peace, because I'm basically what you just described as me. What I perceived as peace, and I was like, hey, you want to return to that, a place with no kids? And I was dating a girl that had like three kids, right? And she was like, it's too quiet here, and it blew my mind because what they find peaceful is chaos to us, and vice versa.
Yo,
there's a really old parable or something like this. It's an old like Jewish story that like
clearly in a room full of Jews.
Yeah, well, of course. Well, there's like always like have you ever seen A Serious Man?
No.
Well, it's a very Jewish movie, but they kind of there's like a lot of stories of like people going to a rabbi and asking for advice, and it's always this convoluted thing that leads to whatever lesson. Okay. But there was this story I remember hearing when I was a kid at synagogue, and it actually did it stood out to me, and like I still think about it, where like it was a man that like had children, and he had a wife, and he was just tired. His house was loud, and he like couldn't get a moment of silence, and it was like too much for him. And so he went to the rabbi and said, what do I do? Like, my house is too chaotic, I don't know what to do. And then the rabbi said, all right, do you have a cow? And this was like back in like the 1800s or some shit. And he was like, do you have a cow? And he was like, yeah. He was like, take the cow, bring it into the house. And he was like, what would that have to? Just do it. And so he did it. He brought the cow into the house, and now it's louder. It's worse. And so then he like goes to the rabbi. He's like, what do I do like now? Like it's not getting any better. He's like, do you have a goat? And he's like, it's the 1800s and I'm a Jew. Of course I have a goat. And that like so then like
so
he says like
yeah,
so they take the goat
house.
and put it in the house, and then like eventually he's losing his mind, and he's like, I don't know, like I'm losing my mind. This is way too much. He's like, okay, what I want you to do now is take the goat and the cow and the horse. I assume there was a horse at some point.
Yeah.
And take all of them and just like put them back outside. And now it's just back to him and his family. And relative to how it was when he had the cow and the goat and his mother and everything, now peaceful. It seems peaceful.
Yeah.
Because
but he's putting back in his natural state.
It's perspective, yeah.
Joseph got the vibe. Money on my mind, I be on my own time. I will with a dime, I can't give you no time.